Yes.
Yes.
Sharing the point. Can you hear me? Yeah. Good morning and welcome to this lecture series on public policy analysis. It's a 5-week lecture series in October and November. And this is the first of the 5-week lecture series on policy analysis. The lecture series will cover topics on introduction to public policy, goals and analytical process of policy formulation, methodologies and methodological consideration in policy analysis, evidence synthesis and policy recommendations, policy implementation, policy evaluation, and monitoring. These are the topics that we will be discussing in this course of these 5 lecture series. Now, in this first lecture, we will devote time to discuss introduction to public policy, the goals and the analytical process of policy formulation. The brief outline of this lecture, the first part is devoted to discussing the introduction to public policy. What is public policy and what is policy analysis, the origin and context of policy studies, the purpose and goals of public policy, policy types and instruments, and the stages and agenda setting and policy analysis, or in policy. The second part of this lecture will discuss the process of policy formulation in terms of the stages of policy analysis, framing policy problem, how to transform evidence into policy, and who are the policy actors and stakeholders in policy analysis. For the first, conceptually, what is public policy? In the simplest form, policy is defined as a purposeful course of action followed by policy actors. This is a very simple form of the definition of policy. However, alternatively, public policy, broadly government policy, is best described as the broad area of government laws, regulation, and court decisions, and local laws, including ordinances. Others describe policy as a sum of government activities, actions pursued directly or against, as those activities have an impact on the lives of the people. But if you are looking for a more conceptually broader definition, an academic definition of policy, policy is more broadly defined as an institutionalized proposal to solve relevant and real-world problems that are guided by conceptualization, implemented by programs, is a course of action, that is policy action, created and enacted typically by a government or an organization. Could be any organization implementing a policy. Could be a government policy or it could be an organizational policy in response to policy issues. What is policy analysis vis-a-vis policy? Policy analysis is a process of systematic investigation of the implementation and impact of existing policy. We could conduct both ex ante and ex post analysis and of options for new policy. Both ex ante and ex post evidence analysis and synthesis can be complementary and can be often or applied together. They can be applied together. Therefore, the purpose of policy analysis is to facilitate the choice of sound policy with a view to improving the lives of people. It is important to note that policy analysis is not a one-off tool, but a way or culture of handling tasks at all stages of the policy cycle. There is a broader policy cycle, and there is always a policy action. The idea of policy analysis, the course of policy analysis, is shaped not only by choice of time before or after policy has been implemented, but also by the choice of focus and associated level of details in the policy. So, continuing what is policy, if you look at in terms of the historical anecdotes of policy analysis, Aristotle said every state is a community of some kind, and every community is established with a view to some common good. So therefore, as such, policy analysis revolves around how we determine what goods we should aspire towards and how we should direct public policies and programs towards these ends. What are the processes that we have for defining the good, the common good? And what are the different designs that a community takes in organizing a collective action? It's the policy stakeholder community or organizational community. How do we know when policies and institutions are healthy or in need of reforms? Short-term reforms or long-term reforms? Change of actions, policy actions. If you again look for the origin and context of policy studies as a subject area, as a discipline, emerged in the 1960s, encompassing political science, public administration, sociology, and economics. But in recent times, policy studies encompass many other disciplinary areas, including public health, climate, environment, law, and many more subject areas. Therefore, the roots of policy studies actually date back to the 1940s as product of economic and reconstruction planning for Europe and the rest of the world after World War II, or even earlier. This is broadly the historical point of formal launch of policy studies, both in academic institutions and as a matter of policy analysis as a subject area. Academics and other experts in policy studies have developed a range of analytical tools, methodological tools, and approaches to help in this task of policy studies. Currently, policy studies adopt different analytical and disciplinary approaches in policy analysis and evidence synthesis. If someone is dealing with the policy on law or the analytical approach would be a law subject area. Similarly, if someone is dealing with an economic policy, the analytical framework, the analytic policy tool would be an economic analysis. Both policy design and analysis entail conscious and deliberate effort to define policy aims and map them instrumentally. Therefore, the purpose of policy analysis, if you ask, the purpose of analysis and policy agenda are to convince the target audience of urgency of the current problem. They're always emerging problems, policy problems, which need action, policy action, and the need to adopt preferred alternative course of action that needs to be outlined and therefore to serve as a medium and impetus for an action, policy action. Therefore, it is important to persuade and convince the value of addressing a policy problem. There are always various departments of policy making, ministries. There's always a problem, that there is always an emerging problem which needs to be addressed to the particular target audience, to the particular target population. The audience in this case would also mean policy stakeholders. Also, the target audience would also mean the target population which require policy intervention. Therefore, policy analysis documents and outlines evidence-based rationale for choosing a particular policy alternative or course of action in a current policy debate. Policy analysis overall provides a medium to explore the evidence and based on research support an alternative course of action. Overall policy stakeholder have to make a decision on policy action, which requires very comprehensive and thorough policy analysis before implementing a course of policy action. The goals of public policy analysis are they help in public officials to understand how social, economic, and political conditions change and how public policies must evolve in order to meet the changing needs of a changing society. All public policies have the ultimate aim to fulfill defined goals of the government. The reason for formation and implementation of these policies is therefore the welfare of the population, welfare of the citizens of a country, of a nation, of a region. Government can use public policies to implement government programs to achieve their goals, policy goals, welfare goals. Public policies are therefore formulated and implemented in order to attain objectives which the government has in view for the ultimate benefit of the population. So if you are looking for a theoretical context for public policy, indeed, we have theoretical context for public policy. In theoretical terms, public policy is a process with the differentiated stages of policy making, policy analysis, each with an activity that enables the next stage, and the results of which feed back into the process. These stages aim to address an issue, possibly program or a problem. So this process-oriented view implies that the notion of policy goes beyond planning and commitment in laws, and therefore strategies to include the implementation of plans and the evaluation of results. So in that sense, public policies are one of the main means through which order is established in societies and systems are governed, which are very important to maintain fairness and order. Policymakers, largely official government officials or organizational officials, they bear responsibility to reflect the interest of a host of different stakeholders. They have to be responsible, but also they have to involve different stakeholders in policy implementation, in policy making. So there are theoretical context there are theoretical framework in which policy process is implemented. For example, the characterization of stages in public policy, beyond broad definitions, above definition, public policy has been conceptualized in a variety of ways. The popular way of understanding and engaging public policy is through a series of stages known as the policy cycle, which includes the policy analysis. The characterization of a particular stages can vary, but fundamentally there are 5 stages or 5 sequences in policy process. The first is agenda setting, in which we set an agenda of the policy problem. This next stage is policy formulation, which is largely based on policy analysis, evidence synthesis. And the next stage is decision making